People told me that you can't make the same margins out of both of those businesses. Well, I hate to re-educate everybody. Oh, yes, you can. And we have. You delivering what that customer wants. We could all cut cost, but if you're cutting cost by taking value out of what the customer experiences, you're not adding value. You're simply accelerating the demise of a business. If I was going to say something to the real estate industry about the way forward, it's the same as in all other industries I've worked in, and that is
Duncan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Not at all. Can you recall why and how you've ended up in the podcast hot seat, or do I need to jog your memory?
I've absolutely no idea, but other than the fact that we met and I talked incessantly, which is my typical way of doing things, and then you sort of said, well, why don't we just hold this conversation and actually record it?
It was something like that, but before that, I called you and to summarise said, how about coming on the podcast? And you said, oh, hang on a minute. You're doing some work for us at the moment, aren't you? And I said, yes, we are doing some work. And you said, well, look, why don't you do a fantastic job with that piece of development work that you're doing? And then, contingent on you doing a good job.
Sounds so not like me.
I will either come on the podcast or I won't. So,
well, and here I am.
And here you are.
So I think it speaks for itself. You did a fantastic job.
And that was part of the deal, wasn't it? You're like, I'll come on the podcast and I'll chat and I'll say how good a job you've done. But look,
well, then I should honour that because you did do a cracking job and we are absolutely delighted. So thank you.
So Lockie and John, credit goes to them in the Rockborn team. But look, less of that, more of you. You've had a phenomenal career, spanning many different companies, continents, roles. Can you recall and throw your mind back into kind of the early parts of your career? Because if I'm not mistaken, you studied a Doctor of Philosophy, PhD, at Imperial College London?
Yes, that's right, I did.
So what did you do before your PhD? Or was...
So I'd always wanted to be a scientist. And actually, when I was young, I used to love the Durrells, if you ever watched or read the books. And I wanted to be a zookeeper. So I set out when I was a kid to be a zookeeper, and I used to have loads of pets at home and some wacky ones as well, bats and stuff. And I kind of went through school with a desire to be a scientist and to learn about how animals worked. So then I went to university and I actually discovered I like plants more, which was kind of strange.
Plants?
Yeah. I found them absolutely fascinating. So I ended up doing my first degree in plant biochemistry.
Wow.
I then went on to do a PhD, and to be honest with you, the reason I did a PhD in biochemistry was just to see if I could do it, because it sounded like a very hard thing to do. So it was a personal challenge, and I hadn't really got any better ideas for what to do with my time. So I stayed on and did a PhD. But I did it in conjunction with Rankovis McDougall, who sponsored me. What I found over the 3 years that I did the PhD was that the bench science was boring, but the work in industry with Rankovis McDougall was fascinating, and I really enjoyed it. So getting towards the end of it, when I'd sort of run out of things I could study and couldn't, put off the day when I actually had to go out and earn something, I realised that I actually would prefer to go and work in industry. So that's what I did.
What, as a kid, kind of growing up, what kind of child were you?
Oh, I was a terribly geeky, sort of studying type, read loads of books, top of the class, the sort of kid everybody hates. Liked a bit of sport, I have to say, so I was quite sporty in those days, grew up quite quickly, and if you see the height of me now, you wouldn't believe that I used to captain the basketball team.
Oh, wow.
Because I was probably the smallest basketball player anybody's ever seen in their life. But I used to really enjoy my sport and music and study, but yeah, I was a bit geeky.
So you landed in industry. What was that first role that you kind of moved into?
Well, I trawled round all of the big companies that did the milk round at university, as most people did, frankly, in those days. And this is back in the early 80s when situations in the market were rather different than they are today. So I applied to 15 of the UK's largest companies, and I got 15 job offers. Not because I was particularly special or good, but just because the job market was so easy. I'm afraid it wasn't great pickings for people in your profession in those days. But I then had this wonderful opportunity to choose which of them I wanted to do. These ranged from Procter & Gamble through to Unilever, Heinz, so many of the big consumer goods companies. And of course, you don't really understand how to stack up the criteria in choosing between jobs. So my criteria were not really about how much you got paid, but I didn't want to go and work for the least paid. But I did want to work for the company that did two things. Firstly, trained you, because to be honest, I applied to go and work in industry and do business, whatever that was, but didn't understand anything about it at all. So I needed somebody that would kind of give you exposure and help teach you. And Unilever had an excellent management development scheme, still does. 2-year program, including studying at Henley College and that kind of stuff, where you go through effectively an MBA, and they teach you what business is all about, plus all of the on-the-job secondments to all of the functions that you need to experience. The second thing they did was they gave you what was lovingly called in those days a martini contract. Now, for those of your listeners who are as old as I am, they'll remember the old days when a martini advert used to say anytime, any place, anywhere. The bit they didn't mention was and for any amount of money that we feel like giving you as well. But we signed these wonderful contracts with Unilever that basically sold your soul to the company, and they could send you anywhere they liked to do anything they fancied, anywhere in the world, at any time. So the great opportunity for me was I'd always wanted to go and live and work overseas. And with Unilever, it was a guarantee. It wasn't just an opportunity. You had to do it. And that was a wonderful thing.
And combined with the robust training and additional academic qualification, that really, really appealed.
Yeah, it really did. So, the challenge was, could Unilever help take a rather geeky scientist who didn't really know a lot about business and real life, frankly, and turn him into a useful manager, and then send him somewhere overseas to see if he could do anything useful outside of the UK. So all of that was about adventure, frankly, and that was the thing that motivated me probably the most.
Talk to me about the first few roles that you had. How did your kind of early career kind of develop?
Yeah, so I did the usual smorgasbord of different functional challenges, through from working in HR, through to finance, marketing, and so on. But the real core of what I did was factory life. And perhaps because I was a technical person, I was sent first of all to go and work in a factory. And I had the great privilege of being sent up to Liverpool. Now, I'm a southerner, as you can probably tell. I was 23 years old, and I was sent up to go and run a particular unit in a factory in Liverpool that consisted of 250 part-time ladies stripping the cooked chicken off chicken carcasses. Now, as you can imagine, this is probably not the most fulfilling of activities for any human being to do. So the way they got through it was lots and lots of chat and banter with each other to get through the day when they were doing piecework. And of course, what better banter is there than to bait some new southern soft boy who'd come up from Essex and was thrust into a place that felt like a foreign territory, speaking a language that I really couldn't understand. And supposedly being in charge of them. So it was probably one of the most educational experiences I had, where you had to learn by dint of personality how to manage rather than by dint of authority, because frankly, you didn't have any.
And so in terms of that kind of chicken factory, what other jobs did you go on? What other jobs did you kind of go on to do? And is it very much kind of a learn on the job, report back, or get some additional kind of mentorship from more senior people within the business, or were you just kind of thrust into these kind of challenging environments and it was a sink or swim?
Yeah, it was a bit sink or swim back in those days. I'm sure things have changed a little bit now. You moved around the country expedient on what the business needed, so you tended to be a bit of a pawn in, we've got a hole here, so we'd like you to fill it. However, the company was really good at listening to things that you'd like to do. So, for example, when I finished my stint at the factory, and sadly the factory in Liverpool was closed, and we had to make everybody redundant, and I was part of the management team that did that. So it was a very sad experience, but I have to say, very educational in terms of how to manage what is a very difficult process. And then after that, the automatic assumption was I would go to another factory and run something else. But instead, I went to the chairman and I said, look, I know how to make things now, but I've absolutely no idea how to sell them or how to market them or, frankly, how any of the front end of the business really works. So I'd love to go into sales. And I remember very well, he said to me in his best Glaswegian accent, he said, you were bloody, and I won't imitate it, you were bloody useless at running a factory. He said, you'll be even more useless at sales. He said, but if you insist, then what I'll do is I'll give you 6 months. And when I've proved that you're as useless as I know you are, then I'll fire you and you'll get nothing. Is that a deal? So I went, that's a deal. So he put me into sales, God bless him. And, anyway, 6 months later, he made me the senior account director.
Fired himself?
No, he didn't fire himself. God bless him. He actually bought a bottle of champagne and cracked it open, and he said, "You bastard, you proved me wrong." There was the start of a wonderful relationship between us.
So what were you selling at this stage?
So this was selling. So I was actually working for Birdseye, so selling frozen food. And when I was account director, I was selling into Tesco and Sainsbury's. So the big supermarket customers, which was a real challenge because, as you can imagine, the balance of power in that relationship does not sit with the manufacturer. It sits very much with the supermarket. So suddenly you're thrust into this world where you have to persuade people. You have to try and understand what the advantage of doing what you'd like to do is for them, not why it's an advantage for you. And you put yourself into this whole world where you're immersing yourself in looking through somebody else's eyes and not through your own. And that was a wonderful experience. And some people can do it and some people can't. And
did it come naturally to you?
Yeah, as you could probably tell, I'm a bit of a talker. So it wasn't too bad. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. And one of the things that was great about that was it was just the time where the nature of the relationship between a supplier and a retailer was really changing. It's not just about providing the product and agreeing a price and a marketing program, but it was about agreeing a whole integrated approach to business together. Supply chain, could you cut out various steps of the supply chain to make it quicker and cheaper for both parties? So it became a very cooperative driven thing, and it was also very data driven, in comparison to perhaps how it used to be, which was totally relationship driven. You'd expect a retailer to buy something from a supplier if they took them out to play golf often enough. That was the way it used to be done. Whereas in those days, it started to develop into, would the data support the advantage for the retailer in taking your product on or not?
Unilever took you to the Far East, if I'm not mistaken.
It did.
To Asia?
Yeah, it was an apocryphal story that I was in my office in London on a Tuesday, got a call from the office of the chairman of the food business, who was based in Rotterdam, saying, please get on a plane and be ready to see the chairman at 2:00 tomorrow afternoon. So I bought a plane ticket and went over to Rotterdam, met the chairman at 2:00. And he said to me, right, we want you to go and do a startup for the ice cream business in China. And you're going to go and be based in Shanghai, and you're going to do a startup for that ice cream business from scratch, and you start on Sunday. You can imagine, you have a whole life based around where you are and everything you're doing, and then suddenly you've got 3 days to unwind it and disappear off to a new part of the world.
Why were you chosen?
Well, I suppose partly it was my time, but partly, I guess, from the skill set that I'd had. So I'd been looking after ice cream for a while as part of my role in the UK. But also, I think, because they wanted somebody that had done a variety of functions. And by that stage, I'd done quite a few. So you needed to have a sort of broad experience, and particularly manufacturing, because we had to build factories and so on. So I came with marketing experience and sales and some people experience and all of that factory manufacturing background. And so they needed a generalist, and there I was. And at that time I was single, so I didn't have anybody to make me stay back in the UK. And so I went.
And you spoke the language as well, if I'm not mistaken?
I didn't.
Oh, you didn't then?
No, I didn't speak a blinking word. But you can imagine, we've all heard about immersive language courses. Well, the best immersive language course you could have is to go and live in a foreign country where nobody speaks a word of your language, where there isn't even a Western food shop. The only way, in fact, you could eat was to go into a restaurant, grab a waitress as you went round and walked around the restaurant with her pointing at other people's food and just saying, that one.
I want that one.
I want that one. And that rapidly turned into a need to speak the language because you had to survive. So yeah, I learned Mandarin fairly quickly.
So your experience at this stage was very business orientated, process systems, people, HR, manufacturing, some leadership management, startup, account management, sales as well. Did property fit into the picture or not? Not
at that stage. No, probably came in a little later, actually, mostly after I'd left China and I joined BAA. But I did 10 years in Asia with Unilever, which was wonderful. And to be honest with you, the only reason I left was because the division I ended up selling was one that Unilever disposed of globally, and that was the professional detergents business. Somebody had the bright idea in London one day that we bought a professional detergents company in China, and they wanted somebody that could speak Mandarin, that understood Chinese, that had got some experience of managing in China, and who was qualified in chemistry, would be able to do it. And I did ask the HR team at that stage, and exactly how long is the list of candidates you could find to that? So I found myself on the list of one, willingly took the job, of course. And then, probably about 2 years later, that division was sold by Unilever globally. So I was part of the sales process, left the company, and for a year joined another company that I probably won't name, that bought that division, who turned out to be very, very substandard. And to be honest with you, had a set of values that I did not share. And so we decided to part company, and at that point, having lived in what was the Wild East, it really was the Wild East in those days of China. This is the early middle 90s, and come back to the UK to do something with a lot of really good, strong, solid governance about it. Not because I like strong, solid governance, because it's good for you, and I knew, I had to kind of be able to do it if I wanted to progress in the UK. So I came back to a highly governance-driven business.
So which business was that, and what was the role?
So that was BAA, which some people will know as the old British Airports Authority, that was privatised back in the late 80s, and I joined that as really somebody that had service, customer, and people management experience, which was not traditionally what government departments were particularly strong at. And as a privatised business, clearly it made its money through retailing, and you can imagine that the civil service, who are typically the type of people who are running airports, so it's very much around the aviation part of it, not particularly geared up to have a commercial mind around retailing and making its money through that route. So people like myself with a much more commercial background and a service-driven background were recruited into the company to try and help move the culture on and improve its commerciality.
And it was there that you were exposed to kind of real estate?
It was because through various routes, I then became the property director of BAA. Now, I've got a big old portfolio, so it was about £2.5 billion worth of property that I owned. And a lot of development work took place in that business. So building of sometimes new facilities for aviation customers, British Airways and the like. I was involved in the Terminal 5, T5 as most people lovingly call it, at Heathrow. I was there on its opening day. I will just make clear for anybody that was around at that time, I wasn't responsible for the baggage system. But nonetheless, I was part of a team that had to help smooth things over during that tricky time. But I was responsible then for all of the shops, bars, restaurants, all of the things like car parking, and all of the commercial property ventures, of which that was a very big part of it. So the airport lounges, hangars, hotels locally, offices, and all of the facilities that are needed to run an airport, I had those sort of commercial responsibilities for. So that was my immersion in the world of property.
What was your, if you reflect back then, what was your kind of core skill set and what were you kind of really good at that particular stage?
Well, I really good at, this will sound strange, but I think flexibility. I think one of the things that I'd really experienced through changing a lot of functions that I'd done within Unilever and then changing countries and really having to adapt to different culture. You can imagine in the early 90s in China, Westerners going in and saying this is the way it was done was never going to work. And you had to be really very flexible and adaptable to make things effective as a Westerner in that environment. And so I guess when I came back, I'd really got a passion for service and customers, probably intuition, but also the analytical ability, I think, as a scientist to be able to take data and understand exactly what customers wanted, how they behaved, and how you could change things and alter their behavior for commercial benefit. But I would say overall, the ability to remain open-minded, flexible, and to be tenacious enough to never accept that there wasn't a reason why you couldn't achieve something. There was always a way, however hard you tried. Whereas, a lot of people very much follow a rule book and a system and a process. And, if it doesn't lead them to where they want to, they give up. I've never been one like that. And luckily, virtually every job I've had has always been a route to trying to achieve what you wanted to, as long as you think it through carefully.
Was your exposure to real estate, was that kind of a welcome change? Was that daunting? Was it challenging? Was it exciting? Was it quite slow, boring, non-core? What was that? What was that kind of first experience of recollection?
So throughout the whole of my career, and even right up to date, I've always done two things when I've moved jobs. The first is to keep one foot in the familiar, so doing something that I know I can do, that I'm familiar with, but the other foot in something unfamiliar. So I've changed sectors quite a lot. A lot of people that I mixed with, I moved later on, I'm sure we'll talk about, into hospitality. I know many wonderful professionals in hospitality who spent their childhood and the whole of their adult life in hospitality, and they're fantastically experienced and able to do that. I love that. However, for me, I like variety. I like change. I like the challenge of doing something that I don't know. So moving to property was something new. I really didn't know anything about how valuations were done, how to assess returns, on what basis you balance earnings and asset value accretion, for example, which is important. And then there's the whole world of construction and planning systems and discovering things like 106 agreements. I mean, my goodness me, who'd have thought that institutional bribery still happened in the UK? We just have very nice names for it and we make it respectable and it isn't personal, but it's nonetheless the same thing. If you'd like to build this building over here, Mr. Company, then we need you to build us a new school or a roundabout or an access road or a playground or a town hall or whatever it might be. Same thing, but just dressed up in a rather respectable manner.
You left BAA after 5-6 years or so, and I'm right in saying you went into the food business again?
I did. I went after 6 and a bit years at BAA of good governance, very respectable PLC, very solid processes, and working with an amazingly established, capable team of people, with probably the best chief executive I've ever worked with. I'll just say is Mike Clasper, who now chairs SSP and is an absolutely magnificent chief executive and now chairman. So I went through all that wonderful rigour, and then I went back into the Wild West. And I went out to the Middle East, and I effectively took a job to run what wasn't quite a startup, but was a massive scale-up operation. And the job was very simple. It's a business that's spearheaded by its founder and inspirer-in-chief, Mohammed Al-Shire, who is an absolutely inspirational individual, a wonderful entrepreneur who sees no boundaries to anything at all. And he said to me very simply, we've got a business that is a Starbucks franchise, so the coffee shop. We've got about $150 million worth of turnover in that business a year. I'd like you to take that business and other food businesses that we'd like you to develop, and I want you to turn it into $1.5 billion in 5 years. So
go.
Off you go. Now, I then said, what resources do I have to do that? And he literally said to me, anything you need. How often do you get a brief like that in your life?
Not very often.
Not very often. So, the open checkbook, the understanding that you do sensible things sensibly, but clearly very much focused around domination of the region and growth and opening up a load of new countries. So I spent the next half a dozen years or so expanding a food business into 22 countries. I did things that now, looking back on it, you might think look a bit crazy, like opening up Starbucks in Russia, for example, which was a fantastic business up until certain geopolitical events meant it was closed down. We opened businesses in Morocco. I took a brand called Shake Shack, that's a burger business at the time when its founder, a wonderful restaurateur in the US called Danny Meyer, inspirational person, and his idea of a fast rollout for restaurants, he was a fine dining man, was probably one every 3 to 4 years, and that was a big deal for him. And we went along and said to him, you've got 2 of these Shake Shacks in New York. We'd like to take the global rights to expand it everywhere else other than America. And, we'll build you 200. And he thought we were absolutely pulling his leg, and we weren't. So we set out and took the brand out to all the countries in the Gulf, around the Middle East. I even opened up the UK as part of the operation. So we opened the UK running it from Kuwait, which is an unusual way to run a UK business. But we did that, and it's doing very well today. And we took a brand like that and expanded it probably 5 to 10 times faster than the founder was doing so in their home territory. And that was a very exciting thing. And we did that across a whole variety of brands. So in the end, we ended up with a business that was worth, when I left, $1.5 billion. And I remember a seminal conversation with Mohammed Al-Shire, who, as I said, is a wonderful human being, but quite mischievous. And I said to him, Mohammed, it's time for me to move on and go back home. I built you a $1.5 billion business. And he said, no, it wasn't $1.5 billion US dollars. No, I'm talking about Kuwaiti dinars. That is 3.5 times more than that. At which point I wasn't sure whether he was serious or pulling my leg, but anyway, God bless him. I came back with his blessing, and it was sad to leave such a wonderful, expansive role. I was probably the best friend of every recruiter in the UK, because I think during my time there I recruited over 15,000 people.
Wow.
In the space of about 6 years, which is a remarkable number.
And you were the president of that business?
I was the president of that business, yeah, and it was just a huge honour.
lesson in qualifying the brief up front in terms of the currency and the targets. Talk to me about the role after that. Where did you land and what did you do?
Yeah, so I over the years, I think I'd always pushed myself a little bit similar to when I made myself do the PhD, was just to see if I could do it. So I wanted to become a FTSE 250 CEO, mostly because I wanted to see if I could do it. So I set myself a task when I decided that it was time to leave the Middle East and come back to the UK, to find a suitable role in the UK to achieve that. And I took on the role as CEO of Punch Taverns, the pub company. Now, I think in hindsight, it was mostly because there was no other idiot prepared to take it on, because it was, in those days, a very broken company. And the job was very clear. It had been through a lot of financial challenges, through debt crisis. It was geared up to well over 80%, so very high debt, very hard to service the debt. All the profit in the company went to servicing the debt. So the job was get it back on a sensible footing, drive up the earnings, get the debt down, navigate some new legislation that was coming along that basically barred the beer tie. Now, for those people that know, the way that the pub industry typically worked for centuries was brewers would own pubs as well as producing beer, and they'd put a landlord in, and that landlord had to buy the beer from that brewery at, let's be honest, a rather exalted price. And that was in lieu of paying what was quite a cheap rent. Legislation came in that basically broke that model and gave any company that had more than 500 pubs the ability to their landlords to go and buy beer from wherever they liked at market prices, and in fairness for the landlord then, the pub owning company, to charge a market rent. But that broke a centuries-old beer model, beer tie model, that frankly was a bit outdated. Now, most people in the industry at that point were either panicking, selling out, didn't know what to do because it was going to break the beer, the income model of the business. I looked at it very differently. I looked at this as being the catalyst that nobody could avoid, that needed to come in order to change what was an outdated model. So we approached it in a very proactive way, and came up with a new working arrangement, a new contractual arrangement with our customers that was based on a sort of a franchising model, I guess, partly from my experience of having worked in the Middle East. And we worked that up together. The team took it out. It became quite successful, and is now one of the predominant models in the UK now for new pub ownership. And we weren't the only ones that were doing it. Other people came along and did the same sort of thing too. And as a result of that, we managed to find the right route through the legislation. But at the same time, I sold off a lot of the real estate, particularly all our pubs in London, for very high multiples to mostly alternative use. And that did two things. It got the debt of the company right down, but it also allowed us to have a geographical focus. And coming out of London, or largely coming out of London, allowed us to have one geography that we weren't having to focus on whilst we invested the money coming in from that in the others. And we grew the earnings of the company quite well. And then after a couple of years, we looked at routes to move the company into new ownership, and did a deal with a private equity business and with Heineken, and split the company into two. And the pubs were sold into each of those tranches, and the company has been a huge success as it is today.
Quick one from me. If you haven't already subscribed or followed this show on the podcast or app where you listen or watch, please do. It takes 10 seconds and helps tremendously. I've got really big plans for the People, Property, Place podcast, and that one small action really, really helps grow the show and the presence and enables us to keep doing what we're doing. So if you haven't already, please follow or like on the platform you watch or listen to. Thanks so much. Job done. Time for a new role, new challenge.
Time for a new role. Transform and move on. That was very much my watchword then. So I moved on to working back into restaurants. And I worked with Richard Caring and I ran Bill's Restaurants, which was one of his outlets, again on a transformation. And similar story, business that was in decline. Hadn't been invested in, hadn't had a new consumer proposition since it was opened really. Needed to have a refreshment, a change. So we set about making a big investment program, transforming the proposition, changing the look and feel of the restaurant, all the designs, the menus, the service style, and so on, and a relaunch to revitalise the brand, which went really well. So I did that for a little bit, and then I got approached to do another transformation, this time in leisure, and going back to my constant tenet of 1 foot in something familiar and 1 foot in something new. The idea of moving into the leisure area and doing something in family entertainment, partly is what I knew, customer service, very much focused around consumerism and understanding what drove people to spend discretionary money. But 1 foot is something I didn't know, which was entertainment. So I took on the CEO role of 10 Entertainment to do a similar sort of transformation.
You're a glutton for punishment, aren't you?
Well, I did that just before COVID, so that it turned out to be punishment, because after a year of fantastic, a year and a half actually, of fantastic growth, what I'm most proud of there was the team turned around, and I worked with an outstanding transformation specialist who I've worked with many times since, and we got 12.5% like-for-like growth into that business without spending a pound of capex, purely by changing the way that we engaged people, motivated them, talked to them, developed them, communicated with them, and so on. So it was an entirely people-driven improvement in the business, and it was wonderful to see. And you could just feel and see the motivation changes in people, and that found its way through to the customer, because the customer experienced a greater degree of joy, and we drove customer numbers up and the spend went up, and we grew like for like 12.5% through without spending a pound. Would have been great to have continued that, but I'm afraid Boris Johnson put an end to that, and I had to shut the company down like everybody else did.
Then the phone rang.
And then the phone rang again. And this time it was from an old colleague of mine who had been on the board of Punch, seen what had happened there with the transformation, and said to me, would you come and do the same thing in student accommodation business, Empiric Student Property, ESP, which is where I am at today. Do a transformation, help turn the business around, and then look to grow it. And that's exactly the journey that we've been on now for the last 4 years at Empiric.
Did you need much convincing to go?
Oh, God, yes. I turned it down twice.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, even though when I was at 10 Entertainment, the business was shut, you still have a huge loyalty to your team and to the customers, and to all the members of the wider community to kind of lead it and see it through. But when time went on, and I realised I'm not getting any younger, so the more time that I sit there in a business that's closed, doing nothing, is not very useful time for me to spend. So in the end, I said, okay, and I went to a business that stayed open during COVID, which is student accommodation. Universities didn't close. And it was very mixed emotions leaving, because I left a team of people who I was very loyal to, but very hard to continue to motivate yourself running a business that doesn't operate with no, at that time, end in sight because of the changing government requirements. So at that point, I moved on. And I had a great successor lined up, and he's still there today. So that's very satisfying.
Why did you turn Empiric down twice?
Well, I had loyalty to my existing business. I didn't feel ready to move on in that sense, and I hadn't finished the transformation that I wanted to do at 10. So I would have loved to have seen that through and get it into the growth that I'd promised. But the COVID situation just made it an untenable and, frankly, an open diary onto when it would happen. So it felt like time to go and do something tangible.
Did you not want to do some portfolio jobs? And
Well, I did a bit of that as well. So about that time, or actually a little before, I'd taken on the chairmanship of a small brewery in South London that still makes today a really good low alcohol beer. So I'd used a little bit of my pub experience and drinks industry experience to help them. I'd been a non-executive at a restaurant group in the Middle East, so I used to go out and help them in their development and growth as well. And I also took on, and still do today, some mentorship of some young managers who are trying to forge their careers and get up to senior levels in the hospitality industry. And that's something that I take a great deal of pride in helping young people to develop. So I had various aspects of life that were broader than just the day job.
so you took the role as chief exec of Empiric. What was the state of affairs that you were walking into?
Well, it was a bit of a mess, I will be honest. But I knew that, and I was specifically brought in to help the business get itself into great shape. So it had been without a full-time chief exec for not far off a year. The CFO had held the fort, doing two jobs for a long time, and that's a lot for anybody to bear. And basically what had happened to the business was, in its early days, the founders raised money quickly, and they deployed the money quickly. They did so by buying portfolios of properties. Now, we all know when you buy a portfolio what you're going to get. You're going to get some good stuff, you're going to get some okay stuff, and you're going to get some not very good stuff. The job is to then sift it out once you've got it, keep the good stuff, probably invest in the stuff that isn't quite so good but needs a bit of investment to bring it up to standard, and dispose of the other stuff. And for whatever reason, that never happened. And so I inherited this business that had got 93 properties, which is best described as a bit of a mixed bag. And I used to describe it as the sort of Clint Eastwood approach to strategy. It was the good, the bad, and the ugly. And my first job was to identify the ugly and find it a happier place to be, but not in our portfolio. So we set about that portfolio management and capital recycling strategy. Using the proceeds from the properties that didn't fit, we then invested them in the sort of middle category, the sort of good, to make it, I won't say they were bad, but they needed love and attention, and they hadn't had any investment at all. So we brought them up to standard, and then we generated enough money to buy the odd new one here or there. So gradually we started to consolidate the portfolio into higher quality locations, higher quality buildings, and a more consistent brand. So that was sort of one element of it. But the second thing was the business thought it was a property company. And everything said to me that this was a business founded by property people, run by property people with a property focus in it. And that's all about development and about buying properties. I was going to say buying and selling, but they never sold anything. So it wasn't a property business at all. It was a service business because its main job was providing an experience and a service to its customers, who, interestingly enough, it never called customer, ever. Used all sorts of other terms, resident, tenant, and so on, but it never actually recognised that these people pay you money in order to get a experience back. And so we set about the change 4 years ago when I joined in changing the culture of the business to become a service culture, and one where we recognise that customers, however young they may be, are customers and they deserve appropriate levels of service for their investment. And so over the last 4 years, we've spent a lot of time and effort doing that. One of the main things we did was to bring everything back in-house, because it used to be an outsourced business. And you can't run great customer service and own the relationship with customers if you get somebody else to do it. You've got to do it yourself. So we brought all of that back in-house, set up all the infrastructure, built websites, booking engines, our own revenue management model. I brought in some absolute geniuses from who used to work at Whitbread for Premier Inn, and built the dynamic pricing model for Premier Inn, set themselves up as a consultancy. We brought them in to build us the same thing. Been fantastically successful. So we took expertise from where we could, brought it in, and we've converted this business now into a service business and driven up its earnings.
And you've disposed of non-core assets, recycled, upgraded existing ones, but also been through the process of identifying new assets that would complement the portfolio to drive income value and wider value as well. In terms of the kind of the niche within PBSA or student accommodation, can you just talk to me about the types of assets as a business you look for and how it's different to maybe other offerings?
Yeah, we're very different to many others. And, one of the things that happens, perhaps not surprisingly in a lot of people's minds, is there's only 2 listed PBSAs left. That's ourselves and Unite. Unite are way bigger than us, 10 times our size, very well established, a very well run business, huge respect for it, and a very well trodden model. Very large buildings, I think about an average of probably about 1,000 beds for each building, very efficient buildings, generating a gross margin of around about 69-70%. So very efficient. When I came in, we were, nowhere near that, way off. And people said to me, it is impossible for the type of buildings you have, Duncan, that average only 100 beds per building and are much more boutique. They're not typically purpose-built, unlike the name suggests. They're often repurposed old buildings that used to be something else in a former life. So we've got a wonderfully eclectic collection of churches, nightclubs, hospitals, offices, theatres, old residential units, retail units. All of this together makes a fantastic experience for our customers because they get to live in places with a lot of heritage and character, but we're much more boutique than a Unite would be, which prides itself in having very modern, highly efficient, well-functioning buildings. It's very hard to take a Victorian hospital and turn it into something as efficient as a brand new building of a tower block. So, if we were in hotel world, I might describe Unite as intercontinental hotels, beautifully built, modern, efficient construction, and we would be Hotel du Vin or Malmaison, quirky individual buildings with a bit of character, but not at all standard. No 2 things are the same. People told me that you can't make the same margins out of both of those businesses. Well, I hate to re-educate everybody. Oh, yes, you can. And we have. And how have we done that? By thinking of things differently. So I describe the big tower blocks as being very well designed, vertically efficient buildings. And all we've done is we've just turned that through 90 degrees and we've built very efficient horizontal buildings. What do I mean by that? Well, if you cluster buildings together that are smaller in a relatively close space, so no more than 10 minutes walk apart, you could get efficiencies of your management team and your shared amenities and your customer experience and your marketing by building a small village of individual buildings, but all within a short distance of each other, because the customers are perfectly happy to travel between those buildings, to share the facilities, to collect their parcels, to meet the management team, and so on. So as long as you've got fairly fit members of team who don't mind walking that little bit further, then you build the efficiencies. And lo and behold, that golden rule that I was told when I joined the company, and I was told it was the law, where you cannot make the same gross margin as somebody that operates a big tower block. Guess what? Last year our margins were higher. So you can do it. And that takes me back to that piece I mentioned way before from my background. There's always a way to find a solution for something. You just have to think it through and find the alternative, because we did. And now we've got margins that we're very proud of, that are around 70%, that compete with anybody else's in the sector.
So can you just give me a snapshot of kind of assets under management, sites, and where the sites are typically located as well?
Yeah, so we've followed a strategy that many others do, of focusing upon the higher tariff, higher quality, we call them top tier universities.
Red bricks.
Red bricks, most people refer to it as the Russell Group, but it's actually the Russell Group plus a few. For some reason, there are some universities that aren't members of the Russell Group. We're not quite sure why they weren't given the keys to the club, but nonetheless, we find very good. University of Bath's probably a very good example of that. So that's the first thing. We follow the high quality universities. Reason for that: there's growth there. These are universities investing in their businesses, in their facilities, in student numbers, in quality, and they have a global reputation. So they are solid, and they've been around since, many centuries. So I think we can rest assured that they're going to be here for a long while. The second thing we've done is to really focus upon assets that are no more than about a 10-minute walk from the university. So we provide something of great convenience to our customers. They pay for that convenience, of course. Location really counts in property world. And any locations that are very far away are probably not going to be long-term assets that we would end up keeping. We want to give our customers that sort of experience of being close to the university if we possibly can, but also that city centre lifestyle experience that students really do want to have. So that element is very important to us as well. So hopefully, that gives you a flavour for sort of what we're focusing on there. And now we're in just over 20 cities. We used to be in about 30, so we've exited quite a few secondary cities. So that number will probably still keep dropping slightly over time. We've still got one or two that probably over time will consolidate. And then we're buying buildings in those key cities and expanding in there. So we recently bought a cracking building in Glasgow. The sort of buildings we love are ones that are perfect location, greatly configured, but need a bit of love and a bit of refurbishment, because we can buy them and put our brand in and improve the offer, but then we can refurbish them and we get a really good IRR out of that refurbishment. So we get a double benefit for our shareholders.
You're in the process of raising capital, if I'm not mistaken, for a postgrad.
Yeah,
offering.
That's right.
Talk to me about that, because that's different to the kind of the graduate typical student accommodation product.
Yes, you're right. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm an old lag consumer goods guy. And, if there's one thing you learn in the FMCG world, it's market segmentation. And that is, when you start to see a degree of saturation in your main market, you look at segments in there and you try and decide whether you're meeting the needs of those segments or whether there's an opportunity to design a product especially for them. So in the university world, there are undergraduates and there are postgraduates, and there's a lot of postgraduates. Probably over the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be nearly 1 million postgrads in the UK. That's a lot. A lot of them are international. Big money earner for universities, great for UK PLC, and they're a little bit more sophisticated, they'd say, than freshers coming in, because they've been through university and they're there really to study. So we did a piece of consumer research on them extensively. Now, this is a property guy saying we did consumer research. Those two things don't usually go together in one sentence in property world, but we did that. And then we got to understand what is the desire of these postgrads. And the number one thing that came screaming out of this piece of consumer research with postgraduates was that they didn't want to live with undergraduates. Now, there is a slightly elitist approach that postgrads have. Now, I have been a postgrad, so I know how it feels. And the feedback we had was, well, we've graduated, we've got our degree. We're now a little bit better than the undergrads, and they're noisy and they party, and we want to study, and we're sort of like proper professionals, so we want our own place. Oh, by the way, that means I want a bigger room, I want that room to be configured for 2 people, for dual occupancy, not 1, because, I'll have a partner. Or if I don't have a partner, I'm pretty hopeful I'm going to get one. So make me a bigger bathroom, make me a bigger kitchen area, give me a double bed, not one of those single beds that you have in typical student accommodation. And by the way, I don't need all those shared facilities. So shared lounge, study rooms and so on, don't need all of that. Love to have access to a gym. So as long as I can walk to one of your sites where I can use your gym, if it's 5 or 10 minutes walk away, that's fine. So when we took all of that feedback, we designed a product that increased the density of rent yielding space within the unit significantly. So typically our accommodation units where we've got all the amenities and an office for the team and so on would be around about 80% of the space would be used for rent yielding rooms, 20% for the shared amenities. But in the postgrad product, that's nearer to 95% because they share the facilities in what we call the hub buildings down the road, and we don't need to build them in the postgrad unit. So less density of rooms because they're bigger, but a greater density of rooms compared to amenities because we don't need the amenities. So actually the margins end up being higher for the postgrad product than they do for the undergrad or mixed product.
With a higher rent as well.
With a higher rent. Well, the first ones we built, 20% higher rent.
Wow. Talk to me about ongoing management over and above just supplying or providing a room and the importance and impact of that.
Yeah, I think it's a common misconception. Sometimes people say to me, effectively what you're providing, Duncan, is a hotel for young people. And it is absolutely not that. When you think about it, a lot of these customers of ours who are late teenagers or in their early 20s, this will be the first time that they've left home. And they will have been living with their parents in a community for all the rest of their life. And then suddenly they're into an independent world, except they don't actually want to be independent. They want the freedom to be able to live a life the way that they wish it to be, but they want to live it in a community. So a core part of what we do is to provide an overall experience for those young people. And frankly, we have a duty of care as well. So we're not just a provider of a room. A lot of our effort and certainly some of our cost in managing those locations on an ongoing basis is spent on welfare, well-being, community work, a sense of socialising. So a bit like managing a pub, you manage certain events. You'll have a karaoke night, you'll have a curry night, you'll have quiz nights. Everybody loves a quiz night. And you'll bring the students together over a pizza or some drinks and so on, so that they can have a community feel together. And that's incredibly important because people come to university not just for education. They come to develop themselves and to form, frankly, those relationships that are going to last them for life. And most of us who've been to university probably say these days the single biggest impact it had on our lives is we met fantastic people and they stick with us for the rest of life. So we have a big part to play in facilitating that. So our team are trained to mount those events, but more than that, we also have a duty of care. Being a student is increasingly stressful. We can all relate to the cost of it, and students build up enormous amounts of debt that they have to pay off. That in itself is stressful enough. But the pressure, therefore, to achieve the results that they want to, as a result of building up that debt, i.e., is it a good personal investment, is enormous, much greater than it was, frankly, in my day. I belonged to the era, which I fear is mostly long gone, where you came out of university with a profit rather than with debt.
And 15 job offers.
It was easy in those days. But today, the pressure on students is enormous. You can imagine many of our customers are from China. And what we find there is you'll know about the one-child policy and so on. So often these young people have got extensive families. And those extended families all chip in a bit to be able to fund the student to come here. Well, that's probably a very large bunch of people living several thousand miles away, all of whom want to see some kind of return for their investment, that return being a good grade for that person. So the pressure on those students is enormous to achieve. So we train all of our people in things like mental health first aid, and in how to spot the signs of people under stress, so to refer them to counselling. Now, we are not professional counsellors, but what we are is trained to spot issues so that we can refer people to professional counsellors and help them. We're often the conduit between the parents and the student. So we always say we have two customers to serve. The student is actually living with us, but often, more importantly, the parent that is keeping a very close eye on them. The guarantor, who wants to know, how is my young ward getting on? So we hold those relationships. And one of the great things about our more boutique model is that each of our team members is only having to handle typically up to 100 individuals rather than 1,000 in a big tower block. That means we get to know everybody personally. We know all of their names. We usually know their parents. We'll often know their goldfish. And we give an experience that we describe as home from home, because whilst we are not in loco parentis, from an obligation point of view, we absolutely have a duty of care to make sure those young people are properly looked after, that their welfare is paramount, and that they have a social experience that they want to have, mixing with people. So we facilitate all of that stuff and we make it fun. So all of that is not what a traditional property company does. On top of that, we have to treat them like the proper customers that they are. If their tap leaks, we've got to fix it in a short period of time. We've got to have a proper communication system where they can log the issue for them and we can keep them updated on when we're going to attend to it. So we've launched things like customer apps where we can communicate with each other, we can post social events, but equally they can log anything that needs doing. They can book facilities like study rooms and the private dining rooms, for example. So all of that kind of stuff takes place, and then they can communicate with each other in a community manner on the app as well. So all of that sort of stuff sits outside of what a typical property company would do. And to my mind, this is the evolution of that customer experience for students. It becomes more and more important as time goes on that you treat them right, not just provide them with good bricks and mortar.
Has recent government legislation kind of put a kibosh on some of your wider plans?
Well, it often throws challenges that you sometimes don't expect. I'm sure many people will know about rent controls in Scotland, for example, that were aimed at curbing the level of rent increases that a landlord could charge its tenants, and has ended up by taking massive amounts of stock out of the market for residential, but putting it back into Airbnb, where landlords can change the price on a daily basis. So has it had the effect of lowering overall rents in Scotland compared to England and Wales? It's done precisely the opposite, where the rents have actually gone up higher in Scotland than they have in England and Wales, precisely because of the ill-spotted potential side effects of a piece of legislation. And I'm afraid my experience over many years has been that legislation often has unforeseen consequences that are not envisaged at the time it's put through because not enough thinking has gone in. And inevitably, yes, we all have those sort of things that we have to spot. And it's not just about the commercial impact on your own business, it's about the fact that you're actually not helping anybody in society by changing some of these things because you're not achieving the aims that you originally set out to do. Not the case with all legislation, of course, but some. So yes, there are things that cause us issues, and sometimes things are not clear. Up until fairly recently, fire safety regulations, for example, are not being crystal clear. So we've all been trying to do the right thing and do it as good as we can, and anticipate what we're likely to be required to do in the future, so that we future-proof buildings now. Hence all the investment going into buildings to rectify things that we don't quite have a specification for.
Can you just give me an overview of the team and what the plans over the next 3 and 5 years are for Empiric?
Yes, so you're spotting an opportunity here. So we are very much now entering a growth phase. So we've done the core transformation. That's basically finished. A little bit more to do, as there always is. But now we're entering the phase of saying, now the single biggest challenge in our business is the estate is not big enough. So we are very much on the route to injecting more capital into the business. And, there are various ways of tackling that in what is a challenging market. And inevitably, as you start to expand your footprint and get more capacity into your system, you're going to need more people to run it. So we are very much entering a phase of expansion. And let's be honest, the market for students and serving students in the UK is still significantly underserving the demand. CBRE, I think, made an estimate that in 2025 there will be 650,000 beds short from the potential demand. Now, that's an enormous amount of shortfall. And, given that and the fact that at the moment is barely into double digits, the amount of new beds going into the system, there's going to be a shortfall of beds for a very long time to come. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means competition. And that means that we all have a great opportunity to expand. People will want to come into this market because there's so much pent-up demand that isn't being satisfied. So very exciting times, and you need to be part of that, and we absolutely will be.
For someone listening to this who's reflecting, or leadership teams who are reflecting on their business, and they think about what has worked over the last 5 or 10 years, and they're at an inflection point where the general consensus is we're at the start of a new cycle. What has worked previously might not work moving forward. Can you just share maybe kind of top 3 points for someone who wants to kind of turn around or reinvigorate or improve the culture plan and strategy, and how they can go about doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, some of this will sound rather trite, but it is nonetheless over aeons of time true. You absolutely must start with your customer. Now, everybody says that they do, but they don't. Let's be honest. How much of the property market is build it and they will come? I absolutely don't subscribe to that in transforming a business. You must start with deeply understanding your customer. What do they want? What are their choices? What is it that you can provide that is unique? And what's your capability to be able to provide that experience to the customer at a price that they would consider decent value for money? So you must start with that. And that was the first thing that I went to. You then have to be honest. Now, what I mean by being honest is you have to view what you actually have against those criteria that your customer want with a very honest eye. How far off that offer are you?
As in the team or the process or the system?
Absolutely. So first thing you measure is, if you can, what does the customer feed back to you? Is their rating of what you're providing versus what they're expecting? So, I come out of hospitality, so things like Net Promoter Score, hugely important. But how many times have you heard property people talking about Net Promoter Score? Let's be honest, not often. But it's massively fundamental, because a high Net Promoter Score tells you that your customers rate the value for money that they're getting from that customer experience. A low score says that they're not. And a low score is not sustainable. And we're all in the business of trying to make more money. You can't keep putting rents up if the experience that you're offering is
diverging.
Absolutely diverging. You cannot do that. So understanding how the customer feels about it is important. So one of the key metrics we have, and I think I would have this at any transformation business, matching customer feedback with improving metrics on your top and, to an extent, bottom line. Are you delivering what that customer wants? We can all cut cost, but if you're cutting cost by taking value out of what the customer experiences, you're not adding value. You're simply accelerating the demise of a business. So that will be absolutely number one. Very close follow to that is the capability of your team. And again, I come back to honesty. How do you assess the capability of your team? There's two aspects of capability. One is the latent capability of them. How much capability is there that hasn't been untapped because they haven't been developed, trained, led properly? They haven't been told what the real goals are. And how much is actual limited capability, and therefore you need to change the team members? My experience is there's always a mixture of both. Fundamental at the top of an organisation that you try and assess that as quickly as you possibly can and make leadership changes if you need to early on, because transformation typically starts at the top and cascades its way through the organisation. And you need the right leadership at the top to be able to set the processes, the examples, the motivation, and all of the cascade elements that make up a successful business. But if that is not happening at the top of the organisation, then you're not going to have success. Personally, I'd always bring in a transformation expert as well, somebody that is very well versed in the cultural change of transformation and gets in amongst the teams and helps bring that cultural change about. As I mentioned, I work very frequently with somebody that's very, very good at doing that kind of thing. And then I think the third thing is you have to take stakeholders with you. It's all very well telling stakeholders, investors, for example, or boards, this business needs transformation. And most people would say, yes, absolutely. But if they don't understand what it means, and particularly they don't understand where it is you're trying to get to or what it'll look like at the other side, they have no idea whether you're doing the right thing or making decent progress or not. So you must make the appropriate effort to communicate your vision and what you're trying to achieve to your key stakeholders, particularly investors. At the end of the day, you're playing with their money. And if you don't tell them what you're trying to change and what it's going to do for them in the long term when you come out of it, they are not going to keep their money with you. They're certainly not going to invest any more. So it's a matter of survival as much as anything else. But I think it's a matter of respect that you tell people what it is you're trying to achieve. So early on, if you're leading a transformation, you must have a vision of what you want to get to. You must tell people what it is. You must take your people with you. You must invest in those people. And all of it has to be focused around what the customer wanted. Simple.
Really simple. And much easier said than done. You've worked, like I said, at the top of this across lots of different companies, types, geographies, cultures. How does your experience working actually within real estate compare to maybe some of the other industries that you've worked on? And how antiquated is the wider real estate market and ripe for opportunity in comparison to some of those other sectors?
Well, yeah, listeners would probably expect me to diss the industry a bit in that respect, but I'm not going to. There is fantastic capability in the real estate market in the UK. Of that, there is absolutely no doubt, both on the investment side, but also on the development and construction and the operating side. I think the secret lies in bringing all those elements together to create a product that is exactly what customers want. And look, we could all look around, particularly in our big cities, and see vanity projects, things that have been built because they look great or they serve some particular personal purpose, but they aren't necessarily designed with the customer in mind. So I think if I was going to say something to the real estate industry about the way forward, it's the same as in all other industries that I've worked in, and that is, please try and understand what it is that you're trying to deliver for someone else, not for yourself, but for somebody else. Because at the end of the day, it's somebody else that's going to pay for it, somebody else that's going to use it, live in it, work in it, enjoy the environment. You have to understand what it is that they're going to experience when you're building this thing together.
As we draw to a close, Duncan, I could talk to you for many, many hours.
Well, I could talk for hours.
I'm mindful. I've tried to kind of push through this conversation at such rate without kind of really stopping and exploring each particular journey and trying to pull out some of the kind of the extended lessons. But we've only got a certain amount of time. And so a question as we kind of draw this to a close is, if I was to give you £500 million worth of capital, who are the people, what property, and which place would you look to deploy that capital?
What an excellent question. So for us, it's slightly disappointing that our strategy has not enabled us to buy a proper cluster set of buildings in London. Now, I'm an alumnus of Imperial College. I love it. By the way, I should just say, it is the second highest rated university in the world. How good is that? We're above Stanford. We're above Yale. We're above Harvard. I mean, how fantastic is the UK has a university that's only second to MIT. Absolutely fantastic. And by the way, ahead of Oxford and Cambridge, I might add as well. But that's just a personal item. But it does sadden me that our business has not been able to find the real estate to develop a really good model in London. And that's simply because it's very hard to find a cluster of buildings that operates in the boutique way that we operate, all within a 10-minute walk of each other and a 10-minute walk of a university in London. And I wouldn't be doing my investors a favour by trying to plant a footprint there and then waiting for Godot when it was trying to buy a second or third building to cluster around. But if I magically had £500 million and those buildings were available, I'd seize upon London in a heartbeat.
Duncan, you're a unique character. You talk with so much kind of energy, authority, and experience, and you make it sound so easy and effortless. But I know it hasn't been, and you're a man of continuous learning, development, putting yourself in positions where you're vulnerable, but that uncertainty clearly gets the best out of you. You've done a phenomenal job at Empiric, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to kind of support in a really small way in terms of kind of the recent work we've done. But I'm really excited to see what you and the team go on to do in terms of the next journey and tick off those milestones that you've got. Well,
thank you very much indeed. I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. I've been waiting for that point where he asked me which disc I'm going to play, but I think that was another broadcast. But I would say watch this space. The journey is far from over yet. There's plenty of excitement to come, and lots of lots of fuel left in the tank.
And lots of fun, no doubt, as well.
Oh, and a lot of fun.
Well, thank you so much.
Great pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the People, Property, Place podcast. If you found it insightful, feel free to share it with a friend or colleague. Give us a rating, like, or comment. It helps tremendously. It'd be great to hear from you on LinkedIn. I'm super open-minded to recommendations of guests that we should have on the show or areas of the market we should explore further. So do drop me a message. The People, Property, Place podcast is powered by Rockborn. The team recruit leadership and future leadership hires for real estate owners, funds, investors, and developers. So if you're looking to hire top talent for your business, head over to the website www.rockborn.com, where you'll be able to find a wealth of information, or feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Have a great day wherever you are, and I look forward to catching you next time.